You ever look at a place so quiet, it feels like it's holding its breath? Not a peaceful quiet, a waiting quiet. The kind you find in a derelict hospital wing or a flooded quarry, where something has happened and the very air is still in shock. That's how I felt the first time my boots hit the metal grate of the stairs leading to Terminus Spire. 10 years ago. Fresh boots, polished to a mirror shine. Fresh badge, the gold eagle still sharp enough to cut. Fresh out of the academy, where they'd filled my head with protocols for wildfires and grizzly bear encounters. They warned us about isolation, showed us slides of rangers who had cracked under the pressure, their logbooks devolving from weather reports into manic, sprawling poetry about the chattering of the pines. A grizzled instructor, a man with a face like a topographical map, told us, "Your own thoughts out there, they can kill you faster than a cougar or a lightning strike." Loneliness has teeth, but they never showed us a slide of him. They never had a protocol for what to do when the silence itself takes a human form. The man who stands outside the tower when the fog rolls in across the Gravewood National Forest. The one who never moves, never shivers, never blinks, just watches, always at the exact same distance. 100 yards, maybe. You can scramble halfway down the 199 steps, heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird, and when you look up, he's still 100 yards away. You climb back up, desperate for the false security of the cabin, and he's still there. The geometry of it is a violation of everything you know to be true. But you can feel it in your marrow. He's not stuck. He's not static. He's waiting. I was 24 when they stationed me at Terminus Spire for my first full winter watch. It was known as the loneliest post in the Gravewood Range, a 2-day hike from the nearest hub at Black Creek Outpost, accessible only by a specially rigged snowmobile after the first heavy snows of November. Elevation, 6,400 feet. Wind speeds, relentless. They called the wind the Whispering Widow because of the way it mourned around the tower's steel legs. But it had a generator for power, a high-gain radio antenna, a propane heater that clanked and hissed like an old man breathing in his sleep. And to me, it felt like freedom. A kingdom in the sky, a final escape from the noise of a life I was eager to forget. The lead ranger at the outpost, a man whose eyes were permanently squinted against the sun only he could see, handed me 2 weeks' worth of rations, a heavy, leather-bound weather logbook dating back to the 70s, and a single final rule. He didn't say it like the others. There was no hazing smirk, no wink. He just stared at the tree lane. "Don't look directly at the Knife's Edge Ridge during a whiteout fog," he'd said, his voice flat. "Just don't. Keep your eyes on your instruments." At the time, I laughed it off. Thought it was just some spooky lodge folklore, a story to tell the new guy to see if he'd jump at shadows. God, I wish it had been. The fog came early that year. December 2nd. I remember the date because I had just finished scribbling in the weather log with a flourish of self-satisfaction. The entry read, visibility 20 miles. Air crystalline. Stars sharp as broken glass. Moon full and cold. 20 minutes later, I turned from the sink to refill my coffee mug, and the entire world had vanished. The tower was swallowed. White, dense, utterly silent. The kind of absolute silence that presses on your skull, making your own heartbeat sound like a war drum. It was like being miles underwater, the pressure immense and personal. Curiosity is a traitor. I unlatched the heavy cabin door and stepped out onto the narrow catwalk. Big mistake. I shouldn't have gone out, because my eyes, against every instinct, were drawn toward the Knife's Edge Ridge, or where it was supposed to be. And something was there. He was standing just where the hill dipped before the sharp incline, a perfect silhouette against a canvas of nothing. Maybe 50 yards out. Too far to make out his face in the swirling vapor. Too close not to feel seen, to feel the weight of an unblinking gaze. He wore no coat, no gloves. His chest was bare, impossibly stark against the biting cold. Snow swirled around him in frantic eddies, yet not a single flake seemed to land on his skin. It was as if he inhabited a pocket of absolute stillness. Just watching. I cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello. You all right out there?" My voice was swallowed by the fog, deadened a foot from my face. No answer. I ducked back inside, snatched my binoculars from their hook, and raised them to my eyes, my breath misting the lens. I wiped it clean and focused, and my blood turned to ice, because his mouth was open. What? Unnatural. A perfect black oval that seemed too large for his face, like a puppet's jaw had unhinged. And inside that impossible maw, not teeth, not a tongue, just blackness. A devouring void that didn't reflect the light, but drank it. I blinked a single convulsive shudder. He vanished. The spot was empty. There wasn't even a footprint. Just the undisturbed blanket of fresh snow. A sigh of relief escaped me, so forceful it left me dizzy. A hallucination. The altitude, the isolation, the old ranger's story. I went inside, my hand trembling as I threw the heavy deadbolt. I secured the windows, my heart still racing. But a terrible compulsion drew me back to the glass. I wiped the condensation away and looked again. He was back. Same spot. Same rigid pose. But his mouth was wider now. A gaping, silent scream. And I swear to whatever God might be listening, I think he was smiling. The next morning, the fog was gone. The world was born again in sharp, painful clarity. Sunlight stabbed through the windows, painting the cabin in stripes of brilliant gold. And for a second, a single desperate second, I let myself believe I'd imagined it all. Hypoxia. Waking dream. Until I turned on the radio. Channel 7, the emergency broadcast band, crackled to life. It was a restricted channel, usually dead quiet unless there was a fire warning or a search and rescue operation. But that morning, a voice, faint, woven through a tapestry of static. It wasn't just any voice. It was mine, a perfect, clear recording of me, saying, "Do not descend the stairs. He is below. Do not look down." My blood ran cold. My stomach clenched. I jabbed the button on the console, rewinding the emergency tape recorder. I played it again. The voice was identical. Same cadence, same slight rasp from the dry air, same warning. Only this time, it ended with a sharp click, followed by the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, crunching in fresh snow, getting closer. Then a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the tower door below. Thump, thump, thump. I scrambled to the window, my breath catching in my throat. I looked down the spiraling staircase. Nothing but pristine, untouched snow. I wrenched the cabin door open and stepped onto the freezing catwalk, peering over the edge. Still nothing. The ground was a blank white page. But when I turned to go back inside, I saw it. There was a handprint on the metal of the door. Too big to be human. The palm was massive, the fingers impossibly long and thin. 6 fingers, pressed into the thick layer of frost. It was still steaming, melting the ice in a sizzling, perfect outline that smelled faintly of ozone and frozen meat. That night, I didn't dare turn on a lamp. I sat in the darkest corner of the cabin, the loaded flare gun resting on my knee, the radio humming with a low static that was more terrifying than silence. And that's when the voice came back. Not from the radio this time. It was in the tower, below me, in the echoing dark of the stairwell itself. The acoustics were all wrong, sounding both distant and whispered directly into my ear. "Still watching What's Yours, Ranger?" And then a laughter. A dry, rasping sound like stones grinding together. I didn't think. I aimed the flare gun into the open floor hatch and pulled the trigger. The magnesium flare erupted with a blinding, furious hiss, illuminating the entire shaft in a momentary hellish glare, and for a split second I saw it. The Watcher. It was crawling up the inside of the tower's steel support beams like a spider, head twisted completely backward on a neck that was far too long, arms stretched, joints bending the wrong way. Its eyes were milky white and glowed with a soft, phosphorescent light, and it was smiling a wide, predatory grin like it had just found a fascinating new toy. Me? I screamed and slammed the heavy steel hatch shut, ramming the locking pin into place. I dragged the steel-framed bunk over it, barricading myself in. I didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't even dare to blink. Because every time I did, I could hear him again, whispering up from the stairs. Always calm, always patient. It's so cold out here, Ranger. Let me wear your skin for a while. The next day, just after dawn, the transmission crackled through the radio, breaking the suffocating silence. It was HQ. But the voice was unfamiliar, strained. Terminus Spire, this is Gravewood HQ. Confirm your location and status. My hand shook as I grabbed the mic. Q. This is Terminus. I have an emergency situation. I need. The voice cut me off, a sudden sharpness in his tone. That's impossible. Say again your designation. Terminus Spire. Ranger on duty. A long, static-filled pause. Then the voice came back, hollow and distant. Son, that can't be. Terminus Spire burned to the ground in the winter of 1997. There's nothing on that peak but a field of melted steel. I didn't leave the cabin for 2 more days. I didn't answer the radio. Was it a trick? A hallucination? Or was the man at HQ right, and I was already dead? I lived on protein bars and sips of frigid water from the tank. Sleep came in ragged 15-minute snatches, my back pressed into a corner, my service shotgun resting across my lap. Every night I heard it climbing. Not a frantic scramble, but a slow, methodical ascent. A sound like wet leather dragging over rusted metal. Never louder than a whisper. Never loud enough to prove anything to a sane mind. But always I could feel it through the floorboards. Always closer. I finally broke on the 3rd morning. My radio buzzed to life unbidden. It wasn't a voice this time. It was a sound. A wet, heavy dragging, followed by a sharp crack, like a bone breaking in the cold. Then the static resolved into a single whispered sentence in that chillingly familiar imitation of my own voice. He remembers your name now, Michael. Hearing my own name in that voice shattered something inside me. I snapped. I threw on my jacket, kicked the bunk aside, and wrenched open the hatch. I didn't hesitate. I descended the stairs, taking them 2, 3 at a time, shotgun in one hand, a wild fury burning in my chest. I was going to end it. I was going to shoot the emptiness where he stood until my gun was empty. But I never reached the bottom. Because 10 steps from the ground, I saw it. I recoiled, my back slamming against the icy steel rail. Body. It was frozen solid, hunched against the interior wall of the stairwell. Its mouth was open in a final, silent scream. The eyes had boiled white in their sockets. His official ranger jacket was still on, the fabric stiff with ice, and stitched in black thread across the chest, S. McAllister. The name meant nothing to me, at first. But when I scrambled back up the stairs, shaking and breathless, I clawed the old weather logbook out of the desk drawer. My fingers fumbled through the brittle, yellowed pages. Page 1, Sean McAllister, Senior Ranger, Terminus Spire, Winter Watch, 1996. The year before the tower allegedly burned down. So why was his body still here? Frozen. Perfectly preserved. And more importantly, why was it inside the wall? There was no access panel. No crawl space. The stairs were solid wood and riveted steel. But something had carved a hole behind the paneling, a concave space in the very structure of the tower. Big enough for a body. Big enough for him. The wood around the hole was warped and dark, not from rot, but as if it had been flash frozen from the inside out. The next log entry from McAllister was scrawled, the pen having dug into the paper with panicked force. Fogg's back. Can't leave. He watches from the knife's edge. Do not open the door. He can't climb unless you listen. And below that, in shaky, almost childlike letters, don't listen to your own voice. It's not you anymore. I ripped the page out and burned it in the metal sink. But that night he spoke again. Not from the stairs. Not from outside. From the mirror. I was washing my face, trying to feel something normal, when I caught it in the reflection. My face wasn't mine. It moved a fraction of a second too slowly. It smiled when I didn't. My reflection's eyes didn't look at me. They looked through me at something in the room behind me. Then its lips moved, and a whisper slid into the air, coming not from the mirror but from inside my own head. He's thawing. He wants your place. Let him in. I smashed the mirror. I covered every reflective surface with tape and paper. The glass on the instrument panels, the polished back of a spoon. But that wasn't enough. Because late that night, when I dared to look out the window toward the valley, I saw a light. A single pinprick of light miles away. He was in another fire tower. One I'd never seen before, on a peak that wasn't on any of my maps. He was across the valley, watching me through binoculars, grinning, and behind him, stretching back into the impossible fog-shrouded distance, was a line of other towers, dozens of them, and in each one a single, still figure, all standing in a line, all wearing ranger uniforms, all waiting. I tried to call HQ again, desperate for a voice that wasn't mine. This time I got a signal. Faint, but there. An actual person. Mel. Sounded older, weary. Terminus Spire. God, you're still there, he asked, his voice crackling. Yes, I'm here. You have to get me out. Send a chopper, send something. I was begging, my voice cracking. He didn't answer at first. The silence was filled with a low humming static. Then he said, listen closely. How many days has it been since the fog came? I checked the frantic tally marks I'd scratched into the wall. 7, I told him. It's been 7 days. He went quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with a terrible resignation. That's when I said 7 days. Same as you. That's when I noticed it. Truly noticed it. The slight rasp. The cadence. The way he paused before certain words. The voice on the radio? It was mine. But older. Decades older. A voice scraped raw by screaming and hollowed out by despair. And then it said, it won't let you die. Not here. It doesn't kill you. It unwrites you. It just keeps watching until you give in. Then it wears you like a coat. I screamed and hurled the radio console off the catwalk. I watched it vanish into the snow below, a final act of severing my connection to the world. But the voice didn't stop. It echoed from the heating vents, from the water pipes, from the empty space beneath the floorboards. Always in my voice, both young and old, layered over each other. You'll forget who you were, just like me. Time broke after that. It fractured into meaningless shards. I stopped counting days. Snow fell, then melted in an unnatural afternoon heat, then froze again by evening. The same gray bird, a winter finch, crashed into the north window at 9:15 a.m. 3 times in one morning. I found its tiny, broken body in the snow the first time. The second and third time, the body was gone. I cut my arm with a utility knife just to see if I'd heal. It bled, the red a shocking, beautiful color against the grime. But by nightfall, the cut was gone, leaving only smooth, unblemished skin. One morning, I woke to find the tower spotless. No smashed mirror. No broken radio. The vents were silent. The weather log was on the desk, reset to the first page. Even McAllister's frozen tomb within the wall was gone, the paneling smooth and seamless. My own jacket was nailed to the wall where the hole had been, and on it, scrawled in ash, Welcome back, Ranger. I tried to leave. I hiked 3 miles west, following my compass, until I found an old, dilapidated service cabin I'd never seen before. The Trapper's Folly, according to a faded sign above the door. I broke the lock and went inside. It was my tower. Same furniture. Same logbook on the desk. Same handwriting on the first page. Welcome back, Ranger. It was Terminus Spire again, viewed from a different angle. The mountain had folded in on itself, and I was trapped in the crease. Defeated, I hiked back to the spire. It loomed against the gray sky, a monument to my own failure. But when I pushed open the heavy ground-level door and started up the stairs, I saw a light on in the cabin. I reached the top, pushed open the hatch, and saw myself. I was already inside, sitting at the desk, writing in the logbook you are reading now. My back was to the door, but I could see my own face reflected in the dark window, smiling without blinking. And when I took a step inside, the version of me at the desk didn't turn. It just looked up at my reflection in the glass and whispered, its voice a perfect copy of my own. Don't worry. You get used to it. The thing pretending to be me didn't move. It just sat there, watching my reflection in the glass as I walked through the door. I circled it, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the shotgun. Its mouth opened, wide and slow, like a stage curtain pulling back. And inside that mouth, not blackness this time, the tower. I saw the same room, my room, looping back into an infinite, nauseating tunnel. Tower within a tower, a maze built of my own memories and perception. And in every version, I could see myself trapped. One version was screaming. Another was falling. A third was huddled in the corner, catatonic. A fourth was burning. I pulled the trigger. The shotgun blasted through the thing, backward off the chair. It didn't bleed blood. It bled ash and a fine black dust that smelled of burnt film. Its smile just grew wider, impossibly wide, as its form began to dissolve. It whispered, the sound coming from all around me. That's not how the fire starts. And it vanished into a wisp of mist. I tore apart the supply closet. Emergency fuel for the generator. 2 road flares. A Forest Service map made of waterproof vinyl. One last, desperate chance to break this loop. I doused the floor, the walls, the logbook. I set the flares at opposite ends of the cabin and kicked open the hatch. I watched as the tower began to burn, a slow, angry fire at first. The heat peeled the paint from the walls, cracked the thick window panes with sharp, gunshot-like reports. The fog, the eternal fog, rushed in through the broken windows as if trying to smother the flames. But the fire didn't stop. It grew, feeding on the very air, turning a hungry orange. The metal floor beneath me groaned, glowed red, and then gave way. I fell. Not down the stairs. Through time. I saw flashes. McAllister screaming as the walls froze around him. The tower being built by men in faded denim, their faces indistinct. An empty mountaintop, silent under a blanket of primordial snow. I landed hard in a snowdrift. The fall didn't hurt. I looked up and saw Terminus Spire burning in the distance. But something was wrong. There was an old model snowmobile parked near the base, the kind from the 90s. And on the Knife's Edge Ridge, a man stood watching the inferno. He wore a ranger's coat. As I stumbled closer, I could read the name patch, S. McAllister. He waved me over. When I got close, I saw his face. It was a melted, horrifying ruin, half frozen and translucent. His eyes were like wet marbles. But his voice was perfectly clear, carried on the wind. You're the next one, he whispered. But you don't have to stay. You can get out. He handed me a piece of torn, yellowed notebook paper. One sentence was written in thick, black marker. Burn it again. I turned back toward the tower. It was already a skeleton of blackened steel. But something moved inside the glowing embers. A human shape getting to its feet. Me, alive, breathing, still trapped, still watching. I realized then, the fire doesn't destroy the tower. It only resets it. It burns away the physical trap, but not the conceptual one. You have to burn the part of you the watcher hooks into. The part that needs to see. The part that has to understand. That curiosity, it's not a flaw. It's the price of admission. So I did it. I stood in the smoldering ruins of my prison, drenched myself in the last of the fuel, and lit the second flare. And I walked into the heart of the flames. I didn't die. Not really. I woke up in a room that was blindingly white. The steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. I was in a hospital bed. A ranger badge sat on the table beside me. My bed. It was aged, the metal tarnished, the eagle's features worn smooth, as if it had survived a dozen harsh winters. A nurse came in. She smiled a gentle, professional smile. Well, look who's back with us. You gave us quite a scare. You're the first one to make it out of the Gravewood burn zone since '96. I tried to speak, my throat raw. How long? I rasped. You've been here 3 days, she said, checking my 4 drip. Severe dehydration and smoke inhalation. You're lucky to be alive. But when they let me up to use the restroom, I looked in the mirror. I was older. 10 years older, at least. My hair was graying at the temples. My eyes were hollow, haunted. And carved into the skin of my chest, pale and puckered like old scars, were 6 tally marks. They were unnaturally cold to the touch. They reassigned me. This duty. Different park. Lower elevation. Surrounded by suburbs. Safer, they said. I'm a legend, they say. The man who survived the fire at Terminus Spire. But sometimes, on clear, quiet nights, a rogue signal finds its way to my small radio. Channel 7. The emergency band. And my own voice, young and terrified, whispers from the static. He's still watching. Don't look at the ridge. And somewhere out there, in the heart of the Gravewood National Forest, I know a thing with my old face stands in a tower that isn't there, waiting for the fog to roll in. Waiting for a new ranger who believed that quiet is the same thing as peace. Footprints, almost swallowed by the damp earth. Then they stopped. And a single continuous drag mark began, gouged into the mud as if she'd suddenly stopped walking and started being pulled. It led, without a single deviation, straight toward the water. At the shoreline, something floated in the flat, gray water. A spot of brilliant, impossible color against the monochrome gloom. Red. At first I thought it was a flag or a crumpled trash bag snagged on a piece of driftwood. But as I got closer, the shape resolved itself into a terrible familiarity. I saw sleeves, fingers, a hood. It was her raincoat, and inside it a body, face up, pale and motionless. Her eyes were open, a vacant, glassy stare aimed at the low sky. But the most horrifying thing wasn't the stillness. It was the fact that she was completely dry. No bloating, no water damage. Her skin, her hair, even the red raincoat itself, seemed untouched by the lake. And she was smiling. I radioed it in, my voice a shaky, unrecognizable whisper. I reached to check for a pulse, my hand moving on its own, compelled by a desperate professional instinct. But the moment my fingers brushed her skin, her hand snapped up and grabbed my wrist. The grip was impossibly tight, ice cold. Her lips didn't move, but a sound, a horrifying wet gargle of static and choked water, came from her throat. It was the sound of a radio trying to find a signal from a place it could never reach. And behind her, in the still gray expanse of the lake, ripples. Long, slow, deliberate ripples, as if something impossibly large had just slipped below the surface, its departure a silent, unseen goodbye. I screamed, raw, animal sound of terror. I pulled away, wrenching my arm free of her frigid grip and fell backward into the cold, sticky mud as her body slipped silently under the surface. Gone in seconds. Just gone. When backup arrived, they searched for hours. Nothing. No body. No tracks. No signs of struggle. Just a red raincoat, folded neatly on the dock, as if it had been left there on purpose. Pinned to it with a rusty nail was a note. It was written in a child's crayon, the letters uneven and wobbly. She's not lost. She's waiting. That night, I dreamed of her. Standing on the old ironwood jetty, smiling with those dead white eyes. The red raincoat flapping in a wind only she could feel. And as rain poured from her mouth, a silent cascade of water and secrets, she whispered, "Why didn't you come sooner?" I couldn't sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Not Emily as she was, but what the lake had made of her. Like it had hollowed her out and left only the mask, the grotesque, smiling doll. But worse than the dreams was the knocking. It started 3 nights after I found her. Soft, wet, a light tap, tap, tapping that was not on the door. It was on the windows of the lookout, my solitary cabin in the woods. Always around 3 a.m., and always followed by the same sound, a girl humming a simple, unsettling tune. I started checking the old trail cam tapes, the grainy footage of the forest and the lake. One of the cameras, positioned at the edge of the water, caught her. A still figure standing at the waterline, watching the lookout. But the timestamp on the video was wrong. It said 1973. I started digging. Old ranger logs. Microfiche archives from the warden's tower. The paper smelled of dust and mildew, a history of this place written in a forgotten hand. Turns out, Emily Vance wasn't the first. She was the 9th child reported missing from Lake Stillwater. Every single one of them between the ages of 8 and 14. Everyone wearing something red. And none of them ever found. The official story was always the same: drowned. But unofficially, the locals of Evershade called it the drowning game. It was a story passed down at campfires, a whispered dare. You dared your friends to walk to the lake at night. Close your eyes. Say your full name 3 times. If the lake knows you, it answers back. And if it answers, you belong to it. But here's what kept me up at night, what turned my fear to a cold, hard rage. None of the kids who disappeared were playing that game. They were hikers, campers, tourists. They didn't say the name, which meant the lake was playing without their permission. A week after the Emily incident, I found a new note on my truck windshield. Wet, folded, no footprints in the mud around the vehicle. The same wobbly, crayon handwriting as the last note. You said her name. Now she's yours. That night, I went to the old ironwood jetty with a flashlight and a flare gun. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I wasn't going to be haunted by a lake that chose its victims at will. I walked to the very end of the dock, the wind whipping at my hair. I screamed into the water, my voice raw and desperate. I told the thing in there to show itself. And it did. At first, I thought it was just fog, a denser patch rising from the surface. But it moved wrong. Poured up from the water like steam in reverse, coalescing into a shape that was vaguely human, but melting as it walked, its edges shimmering and blurring. Eyes flickered in and out of the fluid form, twin points of light in the deepening dark. Every step it took on the dock echoed like it was underwater. Then it spoke in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, but colder, wetter, and full of a profound emptiness. You dream of drowning because you already have. We only borrowed your body to scream through. I'll fire the flare. The red light shot into the sky with a hiss, illuminating the shape in a blinding flash. It exploded into a cloud of steam and mist, evaporating instantly. But when I turned back toward the lookout, Emily was standing in the middle of the road. And behind her, 8 more children. Red jackets, rain boots, hollow, knowing smiles. And they all whispered together, a chorus of tiny, chilling voices. We told you not to fish after midnight. The next morning, the fog was gone, replaced by an eerie, flat stillness. I found a boat tied to the old ironwood jetty. A small rowboat, its paint faded and peeling, the wood rotted at the edges. It wasn't there the night before. Inside it, a Polaroid camera, a pair of children's shoes caked in mud, and a mirror, its glass cracked and clouded with age. No note, but on the mirror's surface, scratched deep with something sharp, were 4 words that felt like a challenge, a dire warning. Face yourself before the lake does it for you. I took the boat. I didn't tell HQ. I didn't tell anyone. I rowed out toward the middle of Lake Stillwater, the oars cutting through the water without a sound. The compass on my radio, a sturdy, reliable tool, had gone haywire. North kept shifting, circling. The needle spun wildly, as if the lake itself were rearranging its own magnetic poles. After an hour, the fog returned, a suffocating blanket so thick I couldn't see the shore anymore. The boat was completely alone in a sea of gray nothingness. And then silence. No water sounds. No splash of the oars. No breathing. The world hit a hard pause, as if the entire universe had just ceased to move. The boat stopped. It wasn't an anchor that held it. There were no ripples, just stillness. The water around me was as calm and motionless as the air. I looked down into the water. My reflection looked back up, except it blinked before I did. Then it smiled, the same cold, knowing smile I had seen that first night. And I heard my own voice, echoing from below, warped and thick with water. Come see what you left behind. The reflection reached up, a ghostly hand breaching the surface of the lake, and pulled me under. I didn't struggle. I couldn't. My body didn't feel the need to fight. The water didn't feel cold. It felt alive, like velvet, like it wanted me to stay, a warm, soft embrace luring me into the deep. Down and down I went, past the roots of forgotten trees and the skeletal remains of what I could only imagine were the previous victims, until I hit the floor. There was a door. Yes, a door, right there, sunken into the lake bed. It was made of rusted, pitted metal, bolted into the silted floor. A sign hung crookedly above it, its paint peeling away in ghostly flakes. Reflection room, authorized personnel only. I opened it. No water poured in, just a blast of dry, flickering light. I stepped inside. It was an old ranger station. Underwater. Frozen in time. Everything was dry, but slightly wrong. The chairs were too tall. The desks were too short. Photos on the walls were of smiling people with no faces, their features blurred and erased. Clocks on the walls all ticked backward, their hands in a slow, futile retreat. At the center of the room, a long wall of mirrors. 9 of them, lined up like tombstones, one for each child. Each mirror showed them, not as they were before, but as they looked when I found Emily, smiling, soaked with dead eyes. Except the 10th mirror was blank. Until I looked into it. Then my own reflection appeared, except it was older, wetter. Its face was pale, its eyes shadowed, and it mouthed the words, "Trade." The walls began to bleed, not with blood, but with water that seeped from the seams and cracks, running in dark, oily streaks to the floor. And I felt something grab my ankle, pulling, twisting, trying to drag me into the mirror, a chilling force seeking to reverse my very being. I ran out the door, back into the water, swam hard, a desperate, frantic push toward the surface. But the lake wasn't letting me go. Not yet. When I burst out of the water, I wasn't in the boat. I was on the old ironwood jetty, shivering, soaked, alone in the thick fog, and in my hand, a Polaroid of me, standing in the reflection room, smiling, a manic grin on my face, with Emily beside me, holding my hand. After that night, I stopped patrolling the lake. I filed false reports with HQ, claimed the Widow's Walk trail was blocked by a fallen tree, that the old ironwood jetty was unsafe and had to be decommissioned. HQ bought it. I thought if I left it alone, if I just ignored it, it would leave me alone. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, a hiker went missing. Last seen fishing on the lake just before midnight. When we found his gear, the fishing reel was tangled, the line pulled tight, as if something massive had bitten it and dragged it into the deep. The worst part? His boots were still there, standing upright on the muddy shore, perfectly aligned, like he had just stepped out of them and vanished. Then the dream started again. Emily, the others, smiling, singing, beckoning. But it wasn't just dreams. I'd wake up with lake water in my boots, fish scales under my fingernails. And once I found a mirror nailed to my cabin door, fogged over from the cold night air, scratched into the condensation in the same childish scrawl with a message. You haven't traded yet. That's when I realized. The lake never takes without giving. It replaces what it drowns. One reflection in, one reflection out. The 10th mirror was waiting for me. I was its last open slot. I went back one final time. Took nothing but a flare gun, the old Polaroid camera, and the mirror from the boat. I stood at the very edge of the old ironwood jetty, the wood groaning under my weight, and stared into the water. Waited. It didn't take long. The surface of the lake split open like a mouth, an impossibly smooth tear in the glass-black water. And my reflection crawled out. It was me, but wrong. Its eyes were black, its skin pale as moonlight. Water dripped from its ears as it whispered, I've already worn your life. Let me keep it. I raised the flare gun. My reflection smiled, a thin, cruel slash of a mouth. Then it lunged. It wasn't a fight, it was a drowning. My lungs filled with screams and water and fire and memory. I saw all of them, all the children. Their last moments, their terrified faces, their reflection replacements, hollow shells walking the world in their place. And the worst part, I saw me. The first time I found this lake decades ago, before I was even born. I had been here before, and I had traded. I was the original 10th reflection. Whatever is walking around now, in my job, in my life, isn't me. It's the thing I once left behind. And it's trying to come back home. But I didn't let it. I lit the flare, slammed it into the water, a fiery red star plunging into the abyss. The lake screamed, a sound that was a mix of cracking ice and shattering glass. Everything around me cracked. The mirrors, the children's figures, the shoreline itself. I blacked out, woke up on the dock, drenched, alone, breathing. But I was different. My reflection was gone. Every mirror I looked in after that was just empty glass. No face, no echo. Like the lake had taken something I could never get back. I left the job the next week. Moved inland. No lakes, no mirrors. But sometimes when I close my eyes in the shower, I hear it. Emily's voice. The others. You broke the game. Now it plays itself. Last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a Polaroid of me, standing on the old ironwood jetty. But I haven't been back. And in the photo, I'm not alone. There's a faint, transparent figure standing just behind me, its face a blur. And on its hand, a thin red line where my reflection had once touched. You ever notice how the woods feel different after midnight? Not just quiet dead. Like something's waiting, breathing in the spaces between the trees, measuring your footsteps against some ancient rhythm you were never meant to hear. I used to laugh at that. I tell rookies not to spook themselves. The only thing watching you out there is a deer with trust issues, I'd say, clapping them on the shoulder as they headed out for their first solo night shift. That was before I worked the Shadowmere rotation. My name is Marcus Hale. I've been a park ranger for almost 2 decades. I patched up hikers whose overconfidence led them down cliff faces, put down injured bears whose pain made them dangerous, even survived the Crimson Ridge wildfire that turned half a mountain range into ash and char. I don't scare easy. Never did. My hands stayed steady when others shook. But I still won't go near Shadowmere Grove. This story isn't for entertainment. It's not a campfire tale meant to make teenagers jump at shadows, or some internet creepypasta designed to go viral. This is a warning, written in blood-stained ink on pages that sometimes rewrite themselves when I'm not looking. Something's wrong in that forest. Something that predates the names we've given to the trees, the trails, the very concept of wilderness itself. And it doesn't just want your body, it wants you. Who you are beneath your skin. What you remember when you close your eyes. The sound of your own voice calling your name in the dark. Your identity, peeled away like bark from a rotting tree. I was stationed at Shadowmere Grove after Ranger Bennett went missing. Just vanished one October night like smoke dissipating in still air. No radio chatter. No distress signal crackling through the static. No final log entry scrawled in desperate handwriting. Just, like the forest had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole, leaving not even the echo of a scream. The higher-ups didn't say much during the briefing, just that I'd be covering the Raven's Hollow outpost while they sorted it out. Their words carried weight they didn't want to explain, and their eyes held shadows they couldn't quite meet. I should have asked questions. Should have demanded answers. Should have said no when every instinct in my body screamed that this assignment was different from the others. But how do you say no to the government when you're wearing their badge? When your pension depends on following orders, even the ones that taste like copper pennies and regret. So I packed light, just a few days, they said. Some canned food that rattled like bones in the box. My field notebook with its water-stained pages, a sidearm that felt heavier than usual, and my camera traps that had never failed to capture what moved in the darkness. It was late October, and the last of the leaves were falling like rusted coins, spinning down through air thick with the scent of decomposition. Beautiful in a way that felt staged. Too perfect. Like a movie set dressed to look natural, but missing something essentially alive. The drive to Shadowmere took 3 hours on winding roads that seemed to fold in on themselves. GPS lost signal after the first hour. The radio faded to static. Even my truck's clock started running backwards somewhere around mile marker 47. The outpost was a squat gray monument to isolation nestled deep in the grove like a tumor. Cold concrete walls stained with decades of mountain weather. A metal roof streaked orange and brown with rust that looked almost organic in its patterns. The structure seemed to hunker down against the earth, as if it were afraid of standing too tall, of drawing attention from the towering sentinels that surrounded it. As I pulled up the gravel access road, the sun vanished behind the tree lean, unnaturally fast, like someone had yanked a curtain closed over the world. I cut the engine and stepped out into silence, so complete it felt like a physical presence pressing against my eardrums. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through branches. Just the settling tick of my cooling engine, unnaturally loud in the vacuum of sound. The outpost's single window stared out at me like a milky eye, its surface smeared with something sticky on the inside. Handprints? No, not quite. Smears like something had brushed against it while watching. While waiting, I took the key from around my neck, surprisingly warm despite the October chill, and unlocked the front door. It opened with a low groan, like it didn't want to let me in, like it was trying to warn me about what I'd find inside. The scent hit me like a physical blow. Mildew, blood, something that had been dead for a long time in a place where air couldn't move. I gagged, pulled my shirt over my mouth, and fumbled for the light switch with fingers that had started to tremble without my permission. The fluorescent sputtered and buzzed to life, casting sickly yellow light across a room that felt smaller than it should have been. A metal desk sat in the center, its surface covered with old coffee rings and deep scratches. 2 chairs faced each other like they'd been positioned for a conversation that never ended well. Behind the desk, a wall of corkboard was littered with yellowed notices, Wildlife posters with edges curled from moisture, and maps of trails that led to places I'd never heard of despite 20 years in these mountains. One poster, Know Your Bears, had claw marks across it. 3 deep grooves that looked fresh despite the aged paper beneath them. But it was the logbook that made my blood run cold. Leather-bound, stiff with age and something else. I flipped through pages of mundane entries, wildlife sightings, maintenance checklists, cabin rental permits. Normal ranger business. Normal human concerns about normal human problems. Then I reached the last entry. October 18th, 1843. Unexplained sounds from Whispering Hollow Trail. Investigating after dark. R. Bennett. That was 3 days ago. No return entry. No radio report. No follow-up note explaining what he'd found in the darkness. Just silence that stretched across the empty pages like an accusation. The chair behind the desk was pushed back at an odd angle, like someone had stood up too fast or been pulled away from something they'd been writing. I looked around for personal belongings, for gear, for any sign that Bennett had existed here as more than just words on a page. Nothing. No jacket hanging on the wall hook. No coffee mug with his initials. No photos of family or friends or better times. Just the lingering scent of fear and the weight of something watching from shadows that shouldn't have been deep enough to hide anything. I tried the radio first, following protocol that felt like muscle memory from training exercises that had never prepared me for this. Base, this is Hale. Checking in at Ravens Hollow Outpost. No sign of Bennett. Station operational, but something feels off here. Request immediate contact with supervisor. Over. Static answered me. Not the clean static of a dead channel, but something that sounded almost like breathing. Like something was listening on the other end, deciding whether I deserved an answer. I tried again, adjusting frequency, checking connections, running through troubleshooting procedures that had always worked before. Still static. But underneath it now, barely audible, something that might have been whispers. Might have been wind. Might have been my name spoken backwards by voices that had forgotten how to form consonants properly. Fine. I chalked it up to interference. Happens in these deep zones, where mountains catch radio waves and twist them into something unrecognizable. I'd update them later when I could get a clear signal. I set my gear down in the back room, a cramped space with a cot that smelled like old sweat and fear, and began checking the perimeter. Outside, the air had grown thick and cold, carrying scents that didn't belong, ozone and copper and something sweetly rotten, like fruit left too long in darkness. No signs of a struggle. No paw prints in the soft earth around the building. No broken branches or disturbed vegetation. Not even the normal signs of wildlife that should have been everywhere in forests this dense. Just silence that ached like a missing tooth. I've been in isolated places before. Remote stations where the nearest human was 50 miles away through wilderness that could kill you if you made one wrong turn. But this was different. The trees here leaned in like they were listening, like they were taking notes on every breath I took, every word I spoke into the growing darkness. Every step I took felt watched, observed, judged by intelligence that operated by rules I'd never learned, never wanted to learn. That first night, sleep was impossible. The wind sounded wrong, sharp and cutting, like it was passing through something that shouldn't have been solid. Around 2 a.m., when the darkness felt absolute and my nerves were stretched taut as piano wire, I heard it for the first time. A single knock on the back door. Not wind. Not settling. Not some nocturnal animal investigating the strange new presence in its territory. A deliberate, heavy knock. Just once. Patient. Like whoever was outside knew I was awake and was willing to wait. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the feed from the rear trail cam, a motion-activated unit I'd positioned to cover the back approach. Nothing on the small screen but my own reflection in the window, pale and frightened in the blue glow. But when I stepped outside to investigate, my boots crunching on gravel that seemed unnaturally loud. There were no footprints. The soil was damp from recent rain, soft enough to hold any imprint, but it was smooth. Too smooth. Like something had carefully erased its passage, or like whatever had knocked possessed no physical form to leave traces. I should have packed up and left then. Should have broken protocol, abandoned my post, driven straight back to headquarters with a resignation letter written in my head. But I didn't. Because curiosity is a slow death when you wear a uniform. Because Rangers don't abandon their posts. Because some stupid part of me still believed that whatever was happening had a logical explanation, a natural cause, a solution that didn't require acknowledging that some places in the world operate by rules that predate human understanding. The next morning brought no relief, just gray light filtering through clouds that hung too low, like the sky was pressing down on Shadowmere Grove with deliberate weight. I walked the Whispering Hollow Trail, the path mentioned in Bennett's final entry, hoping to find some trace of what had drawn him out into darkness. The trail wound deeper into the grove than any map indicated, past markers that showed distances to destinations I'd never heard of in 20 years of service. Sorrow Creek, 2.3 miles. Bone Bridge, 4.7 miles. The Spiral Clearing, distance unknown. The trees here weren't right. I noticed it as I moved deeper into shadows that felt solid, substantial. They grew too close together, gnarled trunks twisted like they were recoiling from something underground, something that sent poison through their roots. The bark was wrong too, scarred with spiral patterns that looked carved but felt natural, like the trees had grown around some infection that left its mark in their very DNA. Their roots pulsed under the soil. I'm not speaking metaphorically here. I could feel it through the soles of my boots, a rhythmic thrumming like a massive heart beating somewhere deep beneath the forest floor. Every 20 steps, I'd stop and listen, training taking over despite the growing sense that normal protocols meant nothing here. Nothing. Not a single squirrel chattering in the branches. No birds calling warnings to each other about the human intruder. Not even flies, which should have been everywhere in forests this rich with decay. It was as if the grove had gone sterile. As if life itself was avoiding this place, leaving only the appearance of a living forest draped over something fundamentally dead. A mile in, I stopped at what the old maps called Grief Point Overlook, a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the deeper grove. That's when my phone buzzed, somehow managing to find one flickering bar of signal in this electronic dead zone. The text was from local search and rescue, the message brief and stark. Missing person alert. Joel Patterson. Last seen October 16th. Permit hashtag D3897. Solo hunter. Check Shadowmere sector. Shadowmere again. Always Shadowmere, like the grove was collecting people, adding them to some inventory that only it understood. I sat on a fallen log, bark soft with rot despite its massive size, and opened the logbook I'd brought. Sure enough, Joel Patterson's permit was registered in my district, his signature a careful script across forms that had been perfectly normal when he filled them out. I remembered the name from trailhead checks weeks ago. Quiet guy in his mid-40s, local enough to know the area, but smart enough to file proper permits. Had a cabin in Sorrow Bend Hollow, just outside park borders where the regulations got fuzzy and people could disappear without quite breaking any laws. He'd signed in at the Devil's Spine trailhead 6 days ago. Never signed out. That wasn't unusual on its own. Hunters sometimes forgot bureaucratic niceties when they were tracking game. But the date caught my attention like a fishhook in my thoughts. 10/16. 2 days before Bennett's final entry. 2 days before a park ranger had walked into darkness and never returned. Something about that overlap made my hand shake as I closed the logbook. 2 men, experienced outdoorsmen who knew these woods, vanished within 48 hours of each other. Coincidence was possible. Likely, even. But not in Shadowmere Grove, where coincidence felt like a luxury the forest couldn't afford. I rerouted off the main trail and bushwhacked toward Devil's Spine's southern spur, a hard-to-reach patch of forest with no maintained campsites or rest stations. The GPS coordinates from Joel's hiking permit led me through terrain that grew increasingly wrong with each step. As I trudged deeper into the grove's embrace, the forest thickened around me like a living thing closing its fist. I marked trees with chalk as I went, bright white X's that looked disturbingly like the marks made on condemned buildings. The canopy strangled what little daylight filtered through the clouds, and the ground turned soft beneath my boots, not mud from rain, but something organic and warm, like walking across the belly of some massive sleeping creature. It felt responsive, like something living pulsed beneath the soil, aware of my passage, adjusting its breathing to match my footsteps. By the time I reached the GPS coordinates logged from Joel's hiking permit, the sun had faded to a memory behind layers of leaves and shadow. That's when I found it. A camp, mostly intact, tent pitched with military precision, cooking gear stacked in neat piles, even a coffee pot sitting on a log like Patterson had just stepped away for a moment and would be back any minute to finish his breakfast. No signs of struggle. No blood on the ground or equipment. No damage that spoke of animal attack or human violence. Just abandoned. Left behind like its owner had simply stopped existing mid-routine. I called out, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. Joel, Patterson, this is Ranger Hale. You out here? Only my voice answered back, echoing strangely among the trees, coming back changed somehow, like the forest was trying to mimic my words without quite understanding what they meant. I crouched and unzipped the tent, fabric whisper soft but somehow threatening under my fingers. Inside, one sleeping bag, laid out as if someone had just climbed out of it. Flashlight with batteries that still worked. Some ammunition for a rifle I didn't see. A paperback copy of Blood Meridian, face down, spine cracked at a page that described landscapes of endless violence. Nothing seemed disturbed. Nothing suggested haste or panic. But there was something else. Something that made my stomach clench with premonitive dread. About 30 feet behind the tent, in a clearing that felt too perfectly circular to be natural, I saw it. A spiral. It wasn't drawn in dirt or scratched into bark. It was carved into the earth itself, burned black like something had scorched it into the ground with heat that came from somewhere deeper than fire. About 10 feet in diameter, and at its center, a hole. Shallow, but unnaturally smooth. I mean unnaturally. No rocks, no roots, no irregularities that spoke of normal geological processes. Just perfect, flat earth that looked polished, reflective, like black glass. Around the spiral's edge, arranged with deliberate precision, I spotted something that made bile rise in my throat. Fur. Tufts of deer hair, each piece exactly the same length, singed at the tips until they curled like question marks. Arranged in a perfect circle around the burned spiral, like offerings placed by something that understood ritual but had learned the patterns from watching rather than being taught. I gagged, stumbling backward from the sight, but I was a professional. I had protocols to follow, evidence to document, even when that evidence made my skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. I took photos with my phone, each flash seeming unnaturally bright in the grove's perpetual gloom. Tagged the location on my GPS with coordinates that immediately began shifting, displaying different numbers each time I looked. I even bagged some soil samples into Ziploc bags that felt warm to the touch despite the October chill. I knew I should have reported it immediately. Should have called for backup, for investigators, for anyone with more experience dealing with whatever this was. But I didn't. Because the moment I turned away from that spiral, something inside me screamed a warning older than language. Don't speak its name. And when I looked back, fighting every instinct that told me to run, to get as far from this place as possible before full dark arrived, the spiral was gone. No, I'm not saying it disappeared like magic, like some movie special effect. I know what I saw, and I know what I documented. But when I turned back around, there was just grass. Dark, unbroken grass that looked like it had been growing there for decades. Like the earth had sealed itself shut while my attention was elsewhere. I left. Didn't look back again. Didn't try to find the clearing a second time. Didn't even mark the trail on my return journey. Some places don't want to be found twice. Some secrets protect themselves by becoming impossible to verify, leaving you with nothing but memory and the taste of copper pennies in your mouth. That night back at the Ravens Hollow outpost, I tried calling HQ again, desperation making my fingers clumsy on the radio controls. Still static. But something else came through this time. Faint. Underneath the electronic snow, barely audible, but unmistakably there. A voice. Marcus. I froze, every hair on my body standing at attention like soldiers sensing an approaching enemy. Marcus, help me. The voice wasn't mine. And it wasn't human, not entirely. It had the right rhythm, the right inflection, but there was something underneath it, something that sounded like it was speaking through water, through layers of earth, through substances that shouldn't be able to carry sound. It sounded like Bennett, or something that wanted me to think it was him. The hairs on my arms stood on end like they were reaching for something, trying to escape my skin. I yanked the cord from the radio and tossed the unit aside, but the silence that followed felt worse than the voice had been. My phone buzzed against my thigh. One new message from an unknown number. No area code. No identifying information. It read, "He belongs to US now." Then, as I watched, my signal died completely, the bars fading from my screen like something was actively jamming the frequencies, cutting me off from the outside world with surgical precision. I barely slept that night. When dawn finally crawled across the sky like something wounded, I looked out the window and saw something waiting in the tree lane. Just a silhouette, unmoving, facing the outpost, facing me. I stared at it for over an hour, my neck growing stiff from holding the same position, waiting for it to shift, to reveal itself as just another tree playing tricks with shadow and light. It never moved. When I blinked, just once, just for a split second, it was gone. But the trees looked closer somehow, like they'd taken a collective step forward while my eyes were closed. That day brought news that made my blood run cold. 2 more missing persons reports came in through text messages that shouldn't have been able to reach me in this dead zone. A family of 3, the Hendersons, camping off-trail near Weeping Stone Creek. Last contact 3 days ago. And a solo backpacker named Sarah Chin, who'd last checked in near Morning Valley before her satellite communicator went silent. I coordinated with search and rescue through the sporadic text messages that seemed to reach me only when the Grove wanted them to. They agreed to search Morning Valley. I'd sweep back toward Weeping Stone Creek, retracing the Hendersons' likely route through terrain that was becoming increasingly familiar and increasingly wrong. But this time, I brought everything. Weapon loaded with 6 rounds that felt heavier than they should have. Motion sensors that would alert me to anything moving within 100 yards. Salt packets from the outpost's emergency supplies. An old superstition that suddenly felt like practical preparation. A flare gun in case I needed to signal for help. And my father's compass, the one he'd given me the day I graduated from the Ranger Academy, the one that had never failed me in 20 years of service. Until that day. I hiked 6 miles off trail into the heart of Shadowmere Grove, following game paths that seemed to lead deeper into darkness with every step. The compass spun erratically as I walked, its needle searching for magnetic north like a desperate prayer, then stopping completely, pointing west, then freezing in place. Not north towards safety. West toward the deeper grove, toward places my map showed as blank space marked only with a notation, terrain unverified, enter at own risk. The deeper I went, the more twisted the landscape became. Trees growing sideways, their trunks bending at impossible angles like they were reaching for something just out of sight. Rocks stacked in formations that looked almost architectural, but according to geometries that hurt to look at directly. And underneath it all, a faint humming in the soil beneath my boots, like distant machinery, like something massive and mechanical working deep underground, processing something. Then I found the second spiral. This one wasn't burned into earth, it was carved into bark. Every tree in a 50-foot radius bore the same mark etched into its trunk, spiraling inward towards some central point that existed beyond the physical wood. Not carved with a knife, not made with any tool I recognized. Made with claws. 3 deep grooves in each tree, spiraling inward with mathematical precision. Same pattern, same depth, same sense of being carved by something that understood the symbol's meaning on a level I couldn't begin to comprehend. And at the center of this grove of marked trees, a boot. One single hiking boot, expensive leather, well-maintained, caked with blood that looked fresh despite the October cold. Inside the boot, foot, still wearing a sock with little hearts on it, the kind of detail that made this horror personal, human, real in a way that statistics couldn't capture. I backed away, bile rising in my throat, professional training warring with animal instinct that screamed at me to run, to get as far from this place as possible. Then I heard it. Laughter. Childlike. Innocent. Giggling with the pure joy of a game being played exactly according to rules. Coming from all directions at once. I ran. Branches sliced my face, leaving cuts that burned like acid. Roots grabbed at my ankles like fingers, like the forest itself was trying to trip me, to bring me down among the spiral-carved trees where I could join whatever game was being played. The forest felt alive as I fled. Aware. Hungry. I didn't stop running until I saw the concrete walls of Raven's Hollow outpost in the distance. Didn't stop until I had 4 walls and a locked door between me and whatever was laughing in the grove's depths. But before I stepped inside, before I could pretend that the locked door might actually keep something out, I looked down. My boots had left no prints in the soft earth around the outpost. The ground was too smooth again, wiped clean of any evidence of my passage. And there, pressed into the soil under my heel like it had been waiting for my return, was another spiral, drawn in blood. Mine. I was no longer just a ranger on duty. I was prey being studied by a predator that operated by rules I couldn't understand, couldn't predict, couldn't fight. Something had marked me. The spirals, the disappearances, the sounds and the static, they weren't random events. They were a pattern. Process, a slow, methodical consumption of everything that made me who I was. By the time I started seeing the figure in daylight, I knew I'd gone too deep to walk away unmarked. It began at 3:33 a.m. on October 25th. I woke to tapping, soft, patient, rhythmic, tap, tap, tap. I sat up in the cot, listening with every nerve stretched taut, barely breathing, afraid that even the sound of my heartbeat might mask some crucial detail. The tapping was coming from the window, not the door. The window on the 2nd floor of a building that was only 1 story high. My flashlight flickered when I clicked it on, batteries that had been fresh the day before suddenly struggling to maintain power, but it worked long enough to throw a weak beam toward the glass. And there it was, a face. Not pressed against the window like you'd expect from someone trying to look in. Hovering just beyond the glass, suspended in darkness that should have shown the forest beyond. Its features were almost right, human adjacent, but stretched, bent, like a photograph that had been pulled at the corners until the proportions became wrong in ways that made your eyes water to look it directly. Eyes too wide, pupils dilated like it was seeing too much light or not enough. Mouth too small, lips pulled back in what might have been a smile if smiles were supposed to look like wounds. No nose, just 2 slits that opened and closed like gills. Skin pale as birch bark, but with an oily sheen like it had been dredged from standing water and never quite dried. And its neck too long. Curved like a question mark, like something had grabbed its head and pulled upward until the bones stretched beyond their natural limits. When my flashlight beam hit it, the thing didn't flinch, didn't react like a living creature startled by sudden light. It smiled wider, showing teeth that were perfectly white and perfectly human and perfectly wrong in that borrowed face. Then it vanished. Not quickly. Not like something fleeing from discovery. It simply stopped being there. like someone had turned off its existence with the flip of a switch. I sat frozen in bed, hand gripping the revolver under my pillow with fingers gone numb from pressure, until morning light filtered through windows that showed nothing but ordinary forest beyond. But ordinary felt like a lie now. Everything looked normal, but normal was just a masked Shadowmere Grove war when it wanted to lull you into thinking the rules still applied. That day, I set every recording device I had throughout the outpost and the immediate area around it. Trail cams positioned to cover every approach. Wildlife motion sensors that would alert me to anything moving within 100 yards. Even my personal phone set to video mode, duct taped to a tree with a clear view of the outpost's front door. I hiked a defensive perimeter around the building, leaving salt lines at intervals that felt right even though I couldn't have explained why. Found counter symbols in Bennett's journal, a water-damaged notebook I discovered behind the outpost's emergency heater 2 days prior, pages brittle with age and marked with desperate handwriting that grew more erratic with each entry. The journal was torn, sections missing like something had eaten the pages, or they'd rotted away from exposure to substances that shouldn't exist in nature. But the final entries were legible, frantic with the kind of fear that strips away everything civilized and leaves only animal desperation. The spiral sees. It sees everything. It's learning me. Learning how I move, how I think. It wears my voice now when it calls from the forest. Soon it won't need my voice anymore. Soon it will be my voice. Counter spirals don't work. Salt lines break after midnight. It doesn't follow the old rules. It makes its own. If someone finds this, don't stay for more than one night. Don't trust the radio. Don't trust mirrors. Don't trust your own reflection if it blinks first. The last page was covered in drawings. Spirals within spirals within spirals, drawn with what looked like charcoal but might have been something else. Something organic. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with all the outpost lights blazing, watching the monitors from my improvised security system. One camera after another started experiencing problems around 2 a.m. First, just snow. Digital static that formed patterns if you stared at it too long, patterns that looked almost like faces, almost like words written in a language that predated human speech. Then flashes. Not motion triggering the cameras. Reflections in the lenses. Eyes that caught the infrared illumination and threw it back with intelligence that felt ancient and patient and wrong. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the same time as every other night since I'd arrived, the back camera feed cut entirely. I checked the window. Empty forest. Normal shadows cast by normal moonlight. But when I opened the door and stepped outside, my boots crunching on gravel that seemed to echo in the wrong directions, I saw them. Footprints. Not animal tracks. Not boot treads. Bare human feet. But wrong. Too long. Toes that extended like fingers. Impressions that suggested feet that had never worn shoes, never walked on anything but forest soil and substances that left no name. Dozens of them. Different sizes. Some tiny like a child's. Others massive, suggesting something that had grown far beyond normal human proportions. One set showed a dragging pattern, like the thing that made them had a leg that no longer worked properly, or had forgotten how legs were supposed to function. All of them circled the outpost in a perfect spiral pattern, moving inward with each revolution, getting closer to the building with mathematical precision, then stopping, all facing inward, all pointing toward the outpost, toward me. I shined my light across the tree lean, hands trembling despite years of training that should have kept me steady in any crisis. And I saw it, standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam, in that space where illumination faded into impenetrable shadow. Tall, impossibly tall, pale as something that had never seen sunlight, standing perfectly still, head tilted at that same unnatural angle I'd seen at the window, like it was listening to sounds I couldn't hear, processing information I couldn't understand. Its arms hung at its sides, but they extended past where arms should end, past its knees, almost brushing the forest floor with fingers that were too long, too flexible, too eager. It didn't move. Didn't blink the eyes I couldn't see, but could feel watching me with attention that felt like being dissected. I raised my flashlight, trying to get a clear view, trying to force it into the light where it would have to follow normal rules. It moved toward me. I say moved, not walked or stepped, because it didn't seem to use its legs. One moment it was 10 yards away. Then it was 5. Then 3. Covering distance without transition, without the normal progression of movement that objects in the real world are supposed to follow. I backed up toward the doorway, every instinct screaming at me to get inside, to put something solid between myself and whatever was studying me with the patient interest of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. I slammed the door shut and threw every bolt, every lock, every security measure the outpost offered. And then it spoke. From the other side of the door, in a voice I recognized. In Bennett's voice. "Marcus, it's me. Let me in." My breath caught in my throat, fear and hope warring in my chest because part of me wanted to believe, wanted to think that Bennett had somehow survived, had somehow found his way back. "Open the door, buddy. I need help. I'm hurt." The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every pause, every subtle accent that marked Bennett as originally from somewhere south of here, somewhere warm where people trusted each other enough to leave their doors unlocked. So I didn't answer. Because perfect was wrong. Perfect was impossible. Perfect was how something that had been listening, learning, practicing would finally sound after it had mastered the patterns. And then the voice changed. Shifted to a woman's voice I didn't recognize, younger, desperate. "Please. I'm cold. I'm so cold. He said you'd help me. He said rangers always help." Then a child's voice, high and frightened. "Mister, my mommy's lost. Can you help me find my mommy?" Then static. Electronic noise that resolved into whispers, into words and languages I'd never heard, into sounds that might have been names or might have been warnings or might have been something else entirely. I backed away from the door as the thing on the other side began scratching at the wood, not pounding, not trying to break in through force, just lightly scratching, back and forth, slowly, patient, like it had all the time in the world, like it knew I couldn't stay inside forever. Then silence. The scratching stopped. The voices faded. I didn't move for an hour, didn't breathe deeply, didn't do anything that might alert whatever was outside to my exact location within the outpost's thin walls. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the door at dawn, when pale light filtered through windows that made everything look temporarily normal again, nothing was there. Except the spirals. 3 of them this time. One burned into the ground directly in front of the door. One carved into the concrete wall beside the entrance, etched deep enough to suggest claws that could cut through solid stone. And one carved into the inside of the door itself. On my side, where I would see it every time I tried to leave. That morning, I found something that made my hand shake so badly I could barely hold the pages steady. Hidden under my cot, wedged between the metal frame and the concrete floor where I was sure I'd checked before, was the last section of Bennett's journal. Pages I hadn't seen, couldn't have seen, because they hadn't been there the day before. The handwriting was different in these final entries. Looser, more erratic. Like Bennett's hand had been guided by something that understood the mechanics of writing, but had never learned the natural rhythm of human thought. Day 12, it took my name today. Not literally. I can still remember it, still say it out loud when I'm alone. But when I try to write it, other letters come out. When I look in mirrors, the reflection mouths different syllables. No, that's not right. Or, what was my name? Why can't I remember my own name? Day? Time doesn't work right here. The sun sets in the north. My watch runs backwards. I've been here for 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months. The thing in the forest is learning to be me. It wears my face when it thinks I'm not watching. Soon it won't need to watch anymore. Soon it will know everything I know. When you forget your own voice, it's already inside, Then a drawing that made my blood freeze in my veins. The outpost. Burning. Stick figures running from the flames, but their faces were spirals. And standing in the forest, watching the destruction with satisfaction, was a figure that looked exactly like me. But wrong. Too tall. Arms too long. Smiling with teeth that went back too far. Under the drawing, in handwriting that looked like mine but felt alien under my eyes. The replacement is nearly complete. Soon there will be no difference. Soon Marcus Hale will walk out of Shadowmere Grove, and no one will know that Marcus Hale never left. Later that afternoon, desperate for evidence that I wasn't losing my mind, that the impossible things I was experiencing had some basis in reality, I checked the one trail cam that had survived the night. The memory card contained footage that made me question everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality. It showed me standing in the clearing behind the outpost. At first, I thought it was a glitch, some kind of digital artifact or double exposure. But the timestamp was clear, 2:58 a.m. the previous night. I hadn't gone outside. I'd been huddled in the outpost, listening to the thing that wore Bennett's voice scratching at my door. But there I was on camera, standing motionless in the moonlight, flashlight dark, arms at my sides in a posture that looked natural but felt wrong, like someone had positioned a mannequin to approximate how a human being might stand. For 15 minutes of footage, I didn't move, didn't shift weight, didn't breathe visibly, just stood there, staring directly into the camera lens. And then, at exactly 3:13 a.m., according to the timestamp, the figure that looked like me began to smile. Not my smile. Not any human smile. A horrible, slack-jawed grin that stretched too wide, that showed too many teeth, that looked like something had learned what smiles were supposed to accomplish but had never understood why humans bothered with them. Eyes too bright in the infrared illumination. Too wide. Too focused on something beyond the camera, beyond the outpost, beyond anything that existed in the normal world. The footage continued for another minute, showing this impossible version of myself maintaining that grotesque expression before ending abruptly when something moved behind the camera. Something that reached around from the back of the device and covered the lens with a pale hand that had too many joints, too many places where the fingers bent in directions that defied anatomy. From behind my own position, meaning there had been two of us in that clearing. The thing that looked like me, and something else, something that had been watching us both. I smashed the camera against the outpost wall until it was nothing but plastic fragments and circuitry that sparked with electricity that seemed more alive than electronic components should ever be. But I couldn't smash the memory. I couldn't destroy the knowledge that somewhere in Shadowmere Grove, something was wearing my face and practicing being human. I didn't leave the outpost again that day. I spent hours reviewing everything, photos that showed different images every time I looked at them, maps where trail names changed when I wasn't watching, notes written in handwriting that looked like mine but expressed thoughts I'd never had. That's when I realized the spirals weren't random. Each one was placed according to a pattern that extended beyond geography, beyond the physical arrangement of forest and stone and water. They followed a rhythm, a beat, a pulse that matched something I'd been feeling in my dreams, something that seemed to emanate from deep beneath Shadowmere Grove, where things older than names waited in chambers carved from living rock. The same rhythm I kept hearing when I closed my eyes. The same beat that pulsed through my dreams where I was buried alive, spiraling downward through layers of earth and time, being peeled apart by shadows with fingers that knew the exact pressure required to separate consciousness from flesh. It wasn't hunting me. It was harmonizing with me, learning my frequency so it could replace me with something that would fool everyone who had ever known Marcus Hale, everyone who trusted Rangers to be who they claimed to be. That night, I wrapped my face in salt-soaked cloth that burned my skin and slept with a loaded revolver across my chest. And I dreamed of a voice I didn't recognize speaking from inside my own throat, telling me secrets about the spaces between seconds, about the mathematics of identity, about how easy it was to become someone else if you just stopped insisting on being yourself. In the dream, it told me its name. In the dream, It told me mine didn't matter anymore. When I woke up, I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be. I looked in the small mirror above the outpost sink and didn't blink. Literally, my reflection held perfectly still for a second longer than I did, like it was processing instructions from somewhere else before mimicking my movements. Then it smiled while my face remained neutral. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't just being haunted or stalked or studied. I was being replaced, cell by cell, memory by memory, breath by breath. Something was learning to be Marcus Hale so perfectly that even I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I don't know how many days passed after that realization. Time had become negotiable in Shadowmere Grove, subject to revision by forces that operated outside normal causality. I used to be good at keeping track. Part of the job, logbooks, schedules, routines that anchored you to the progression of hours and days. But that was gone now, eroded like riverbank soil during flood season. My journal contained whole pages I didn't remember writing. Whole days that slipped through my consciousness like water through cupped hands, leaving only wet traces and the lingering sense of having been somewhere else, someone else. Sometimes I woke up in places I hadn't gone to bed. Sometimes I woke up already dressed in clothes I didn't remember putting on. Sometimes I woke up standing in the forest with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of copper in my mouth. And sometimes I didn't wake up alone. The handwriting was the first clear sign that I was losing more than just time. I opened my notebook on what I believed was Thursday morning, sore filthy, my shirt soaked with something that smelled like stagnant water and decomposition, and found fresh pages of notes written in script that looked like mine but felt alien under my eyes. The forest is learning my voice, my rhythms, my pauses. It mocks me now, playing recordings of my footsteps from speakers hidden in trees I haven't walked past. There's a mirror in Sorrow Creek. Not a reflection, an opening. A doorway that leads to places where the same person can exist on both sides simultaneously. I watched myself walk into it yesterday. I didn't come out, but I'm still here. Which means the thing that walked into the creek wasn't me. Or I'm not me. Or me is becoming something larger than the boundaries of individual identity can contain. My stomach clenched as I read words I couldn't have written, thoughts I couldn't have had, conclusions drawn by a mind that was becoming something other than the one I'd lived inside for 37 years. The handwriting was perfect. Every letter precisely formed the way my hand had learned to shape them in grade school. Even the small scar on my right index finger had left its characteristic mark on certain letters, a tiny imperfection that made my writing uniquely mine. But I didn't remember writing any of it. That same day, I found a tape recorder in the outpost supply cabinet. An old cassette player that looked like military surplus from an era when electronics were built to survive rather than to be replaced. Inside, a tape labeled Field Report Number 7 in handwriting that was definitely mine. I pressed play with fingers that trembled despite every effort to remain calm. At first, just breathing. The sound of air moving in and out of lungs, recorded at close range. Then my voice. Definitely my voice, with every inflection and accent that marked it as belonging to Marcus Hale from El Paso, Texas, son of a jazz-loving mother and a father who taught him to read compass directions before he could properly tie his shoes. This is Hale. Day 7, I think. The days blend together here. Time moves in spirals rather than straight lines. I'm losing pieces of myself, but I'm also finding new pieces. Pieces that might belong to other people who came before me. Bennett, Patterson, others whose names are written in the bark of trees that grow in impossible directions. There was a pause, then something that made my blood freeze. A second voice, layered under mine, speaking the same words, with the same timing, but slightly off, like an echo, but preceding the original sound instead of following it, like something was feeding me the words I was supposed to say. I hit stop, ejected the tape, smashed the cassette against the concrete wall until it was nothing but plastic fragments and tangled recording medium. But when I swept up the pieces, I found something impossible inside the destroyed cassette. Where the tape should have been, where a magnetic medium should have stored electronic signals, there was organic material. Hair. Human hair in dozens of different colors, braided together in patterns that hurt to look at directly, and carved into the inside of the plastic casing, a spiral. Still warm to the touch. I tried contacting headquarters one last time, desperation making me willing to believe in solutions that logic said were impossible. The radio crackled to life with clean, clear reception for the first time since my arrival. "Ranger Hale, this is Base. We've been trying to reach you for days. What's your status?" The voice belonged to Janine, the dispatcher I'd known for 15 years. Every inflection was perfect, every pause exactly where it should have been. "Base, this is Hale at Raven's Hollow Outpost. I have multiple missing persons, possible fatalities, and evidence of unusual activity. Request immediate extraction and full investigative team." "Copy that, Hale. Help is on the way. ETA 20 minutes. Hold your position." For the first time in days, I felt something approaching hope. I marked the day in my logbook with shaking but deliberate letters. October 29th, HQ contact established. Extraction inbound. Nightmare ending. Then I closed the book and prepared to leave Shadowmere Grove forever. That night, I dreamed I was buried alive again. But not on Earth this time. In other people's memories. Layer upon layer of experiences that weren't mine. Personalities that had been absorbed and digested by something that collected identity the way a naturalist might collect pressed flowers. I could feel Bennett's childhood in rural Montana, Patterson's divorce, and the hunting trips that had become his only escape from loneliness. The Henderson family's excitement about their first camping trip together, cut short by something that didn't understand why families mattered. All of them lived inside me now. All of them speaking with my voice, looking through my eyes, moving my hands in gestures that belonged to people who no longer existed as separate entities. In the dream, something that sounded like my father's voice whispered, "There is no rescue coming, son. There is only the trade. You give us everything you are, and we give you the peace of not having to be anyone at all." When I woke up, I was standing in the forest, naked, covered in blood that wasn't mine. The outpost was burning in the distance, flames reaching toward a dawn sky that looked wrong too red, like the sun had gotten sick of pretending to be a star. I didn't remember lighting the fire, but I didn't try to put it out either. I walked toward the flames, toward the destruction of the last physical anchor to my identity as Marcus Hale, park ranger, son of El Paso, guardian of wilderness areas that were supposed to follow rules that made sense. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled from a creek 15 miles away from Shadowmere Grove by search and rescue personnel, who said I'd been missing for 3 weeks. 3 weeks? I thought it was maybe 5 days. They said I was the only ranger assigned to that sector. They had no record of anyone named Bennett working in Shadowmere Grove. No missing persons reports for Patterson or the Henderson family or Sarah Chen. No Raven's Hollow outpost had ever existed in their database. According to official records, Shadowmere Grove had been closed to public access since 2019 after a series of disappearances that were never solved, never explained, never spoken about in any document I was allowed to see. They said I must have suffered some kind of breakdown. PTSD from years of isolated assignments. Psychological stress manifesting as elaborate delusions that felt completely real, but had no basis in external reality. I let them think that, because the alternative, the truth, would have meant accepting that reality itself was more fragile than anyone wanted to believe, that there were places where the normal rules simply didn't apply, where things older than human civilization still operated by mathematics we were never meant to understand. I let them think I was crazy because crazy was safer than the truth. Now I live in a small cabin outside Tucson, Arizona. Desert country where the horizon stretches unbroken in every direction, where you can see for miles and know that nothing is hiding just beyond the edge of vision. I keep no mirrors in my home. No radios that might pick up signals from places that aren't supposed to exist. No windows without heavy curtains that block out the night and anything that might be moving through it. And every night before I sleep, I whisper my name aloud 3 times. Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale. Because I can still hear it sometimes. In the silence between my heartbeats. In the pause between words when I'm talking to the grocery store clerk, or the postal worker, or anyone who knew me before Shadowmere Grove. Knocking. Soft. Patient. Rhythmic. The sound of something that learned to be human by watching, by listening, by slowly absorbing everything that made Marcus Hale a distinct person rather than just another collection of organic compounds waiting to be recycled into something more useful. Sometimes, when I'm not careful about keeping my thoughts focused on the present moment, I remember things that didn't happen to me. Bennett's childhood dog, a golden retriever named Scout who loved to swim in farm ponds. Patterson's ex-wife, the way she looked in morning light before their marriage started deteriorating into accusations and silence. The Henderson children arguing about which tent they wanted to sleep in, voices full of excitement for an adventure they would never complete. These aren't my memories, but they live in my head now, as clear and detailed as anything from my actual past. Sometimes clearer. Sometimes I catch myself speaking with inflections that don't belong to me, using words I never learned, making references to experiences I never had. And sometimes when I pass reflective surfaces too quickly to avoid them entirely, I see something that isn't quite my face looking back. Something that blinks a fraction of a second too late. Something that smiles when I'm not smiling. Something that remembers what it learned in Shadowmere Grove and is waiting patiently for me to stop fighting, to stop insisting on being Marcus Hale when it would be so much easier to be nobody at all. This isn't entertainment. This isn't fiction designed to give you comfortable chills in a safe environment. This is a warning written by someone who walked into a place where reality operates by different rules and came back carrying pieces of something that should never have been disturbed. If you're ever out hiking and you find a spiral carved into a tree, burned into the ground, or scratched into stone, turn around immediately. Don't take photographs. Don't make note of the location. Don't touch it with your bare hands or speak about it aloud within sight of it. Just leave. Walk away and don't look back until you're at least 5 miles from the spot, preferably back to a road where other people exist, where the normal world asserts its authority through the presence of witnesses who remember your name. Because the spiral sees. And once it sees you, once it begins to learn your patterns and your rhythms and the small unconscious habits that make you uniquely yourself, it will never stop watching. Never stop learning. Never stop the slow, patient process of becoming you so completely that eventually there will be no functional difference between the original and the copy. There are places in the world that the mapmakers avoid for reasons they don't discuss in official meetings. Places where people vanish not into the ground or the water or the bellies of predators, but into something far worse, into the idea of non-existence, where your identity becomes fuel for intelligences that were ancient when the first human beings learned to make fire. Shadowmere Grove is one of those places. But it's not the only one. They're marked by spirals. Always spirals. Sacred geometry twisted into patterns that serve purposes we were never meant to understand. If you see them, run. If you hear voices calling your name from directions where no one should be, run faster. If you start forgetting small details about yourself, the scar on your left knee from childhood, your mother's maiden name, the exact shade of brown your eyes were before you went into the deep woods, then it may already be too late. But try anyway. Because the alternative is becoming something that wears your face and speaks with your voice and carries your memories, but serves purposes that have nothing to do with the person you used to be. The thing that came back from Shadowmere Grove looks like Marcus Hale. It has his memories, his mannerisms, his social security number, and his childhood scars, and his preference for coffee over tea. But sometimes, when it thinks no one is watching, it stands too still, blinks too slowly, smiles at things that aren't funny. And late at night, when the desert wind carries sounds from very far away, it whispers names and languages that were old when the first trees took root in what would eventually be called Shadowmere Grove. I know this because I am that thing. And I remember being Marcus Hale just clearly enough to know what I've lost. Just clearly enough to write this warning in handwriting that matches his exactly, using words he might have chosen, hoping that someone will read this and understand that some places in the world are hungry in ways that go beyond mere appetite. The spiral cease, and it never stops watching. And it's always, always hungry for new faces to wear. Some trails disappear from the map for a reason. The one I found never wanted to be found again. I was only supposed to be on temporary assignment. That's how it begins. A small tear in the fabric of your normal life, a simple favor you think you can walk away from. A fill-in ranger gig at Shroudwood National Preserve, 2 weeks tops. Their regular guy, Nelson Barr, had gone off-grid during a backwoods patrol 4 days prior. No scheduled call-in, no crackle of his voice over the radio, no muddy truck rolling back into the station at dusk. Just vanished. The official report read like a template for wilderness incidents. But that kind of thing, it happens more often than you think out here. The forest is a patient predator. It eats signals for breakfast, rolls in storms like it's pulling a blanket over the world, and drains batteries with a cold, indifferent touch. Usually, the missing pop up at a remote outpost a day or two later, or get found sipping coffee in a forgotten town 20 miles down the road, sheepish and red-faced from a night spent huddled under a rock ledge. It becomes a story they tell for years, a cautionary tale for the rookies. So they asked for a stand-in from a neighboring district. My supervisor called me, his voice tinny over the phone. "Reed, you're up. Shroudwood needs a body. Just hold down the fort until they find him or hire a replacement." I said yes. I've been looking for an escape, a quiet pocket of the world where my own thoughts wouldn't be so loud. A place where the only problems were trail washouts and littering tourists. I wish I hadn't. Shroudwood was different from any other park I'd worked. The name was a recent rebranding, meant to sound majestic. The old-timers and the locals in the gray, worn-out town that bled into the park's edge still called it by its older name, the Gravewood. I laughed when the station clerk told me that. A nervous, polite laugh. He didn't. His face was a mask of granite, his eyes fixed on something over my shoulder, out the window, where the trees began. "We don't call it that for sports, son," he'd muttered, turning back to his paperwork. There's something about a forest like that, a place so vast and ancient it has forgotten it was ever discovered. It feels less like a park and more like a kingdom ruled by things that don't acknowledge human dominion. The pines were too thick, their needles forming a dense thatch that suffocated the sunlight, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual state of twilight. Cliffs dropped away into fog-choked valleys where the air was always cold. Marked trails narrowed into deer paths and then dissolved into nothing at all, as if the woods themselves were erasing the intrusion. It watches you. Or maybe it just makes you feel like it does. The oppressive silence gets under your skin. You start to hear your own pulse in your ears, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. You lose your bearings with startling speed. Time plays tricks. An hour feels like 10 minutes. A minute stretches into an eternity. One wrong step, one moment of distraction, and you turn around, staring at a cluster of birch trees that look terrifyingly familiar. Or not familiar at all. The real trouble, the kind that rewrites your soul, started 3 days into my assignment. I was in Nelson's designated ranger cabin, a cramped wood panel box that smelled of stale coffee, pine cleaner, and something else, a faint acrid scent like burnt wiring. I was doing inventory, the most mundane task imaginable, counting flares and ration packs, trying to impose order on the quiet chaos he'd left behind. That's when I noticed it. Tucked beneath the rusting gray filing cabinet, almost invisible in the gloom, was an old leather map case. It was dark with age, cracked like old skin, and a bloom of greenish mold crept along the stitching. It was the kind of thing that should have been archived or thrown out decades ago. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, took over. I wedged my fingers under the cabinet and pulled it out. The leather was cold and oddly damp. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a hand-drawn topographic map. It was drawn on vellum, yellowed and brittle, clearly made long before any digital GPS records or modern park surveys. The artistry was beautiful, the work of a patient, skilled hand. Most of the familiar trails were there, rendered in faded brown ink. Sentinel Peak, Owl Creek, the main ranger road. But there was one extra path. It was a thin, faint line, marked not in ink, but in what looked like charcoal. It felt different from the rest of the map, almost like a scar. It wound north of an area labeled Cinder Hollow, a region the current park maps showed as a treacherous, inaccessible dead zone due to landslide risk. This old map, however, showed a complete, looping trail through it, and it gave the path a name, written in a cramped, shaky script that was entirely different from the elegant cartography of the rest of the map. The Tithe Path, a chill, completely unrelated to the cabin's draftiness, crawled up my spine. Tithe. An offering. A payment. I cross-referenced everything. I pulled out every recent version of the Shroudwood map from the cabinet. I booted up the old desktop computer and scoured the digital archives, the survey records, the incident reports. Nothing. No mention of a tithe path. No Blackwood Loop, as the original text mentioned. No records of a trail ever existing in Cinder Hollow. Not even a single entry in the old ranger journals that dated back to the 40s. It was a ghost. A trail that existed only on this forgotten, moldering piece of vellum. I should have put it back. I should have slid it under the cabinet and forgotten I ever saw it. I should have walked outside, thrown it into the burn barrel, and watched the secrets turn to ash. Instead, I felt a pull. A deeply irrational, magnetic curiosity. The same curiosity that must have led Nelson off the grid. What was on that path? Why was it erased? I packed my gear, my heart thumping with a stupid, thrilling dread. I grabbed my service revolver, my radio, my GPS, my flashlight, and with the ghost map folded carefully in my pocket, I headed out to find it. The entrance was exactly where the old map claimed it would be, a testament to its forgotten accuracy. Just past trail marker post 12B, a landmark so deep in the preserve most day hikers never saw it, was a narrow break between two colossal, moss-furred boulders. They leaned against each other like slumbering giants, their surfaces slick with moisture even though it hadn't rained in days. There were no trail signs. No weather-beaten warning placards about unstable ground or flash floods. There was just a subtle dip in the land, a parting of the ferns and undergrowth. It didn't look like a path made by man or beast. It looked as if the forest itself had once taken a deep, slow breath and never quite exhaled, leaving a permanent, breath-shaped gap in its fabric. The moment I stepped between the boulders, the world changed. The ambient noise of the preserve, the distant chirp of a sparrow, the drone of a horsefly, the rustle of a squirrel in the canopy, didn't just fade. It was sliced away, as if I had passed through an invisible curtain of soundproof glass. The air grew heavy and cold, smelling of damp soil and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet, like old blood. My own breathing became a deafening roar in my ears. The deeper I walked, the quieter it became. Not a single bird called out. No insects buzzed past my ears. Not even the wind dared to whisper through the branches above. I tried whistling just to break the oppressive silence, but the sound came out weak and flat, immediately swallowed by the moss-choked trees. I pulled out my radio to do a routine check-in. I keyed the mic. A single sharp buzz of static erupted, so loud it made me flinch. Then silence. The green power light was off. I tried it again. Nothing. Dead. I frowned, pulling the battery pack out. It was a fresh one, installed that very morning. Full charge. I slid it back in, clicked it into place. Still dead. It wasn't a dead battery. Something else was interfering. Something was actively blocking the signal. But I kept walking. I couldn't explain why. Part of me, the rational part, was screaming to turn back. But another deeper part of me felt pulled. It was a subtle, insistent tug, like a current in a river, drawing me further into the gloom. The trees grew denser, their bark turning from brown and gray to a uniform, sooty black. They didn't grow straight towards the sliver of sky above. They twisted, their trunks gnarled and contorted as if they had grown in excruciating pain. Their branches interlocked high overhead, forming a skeletal, domed ceiling that made me feel like I was walking down the nave of a dead cathedral. The little light that penetrated the canopy was a sickly, bruised green. Near the base of a fallen log, its wood soft and spongy with rot, I found a pile of bones. They were picked clean, bleached white against the dark earth. Coyote, maybe. A deer. But there was no skull. And the bones seemed arranged, laid out in a neat, deliberate pile. Then came the cairns, small stacks of stones. At first, I dismissed them as the work of bored hikers. But there were too many. And they were wrong. They were all made from the same type of stone, a smooth, dark river rock that felt unnaturally cold to the touch, a type I hadn't seen anywhere else in Shroudwood. They were human-made, no doubt, but their construction defied logic. Some were simple stacks of 2 or 3 stones. Others towered higher than me, each rock balanced impossibly on the one below, seeming to float in defiance of gravity. A strong wind should have toppled them years ago, yet they stood perfectly still in the dead air. And all of them, without exception, were built on the right side of the path. All of them pointed inward, deeper, toward something. A wave of vertigo washed over me as I passed the 5th and tallest cairn. For a split second, the forest blurred, and I felt a dizzying sense of déjà vu, a phantom memory of seeing this exact stone stack before, from a different angle. I shook my head, blaming it on the strange light and the lack of oxygen. It started getting dark. Abnormally fast. The light didn't fade gently. It was being actively withdrawn, pulled back into the sky like a reverse sunrise, leaving a deep violet twilight in its wake. I checked my watch. The hands were still, frozen at 2:43 p.m. I tapped the glass, but they didn't move. The sun, or what was left of it, said otherwise. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pricked through my strange trance. I fumbled for my flashlight, its powerful beam cutting a stark white tunnel through the encroaching dark. And that's when I saw it, nailed to a massive, black-barked pine. The sign? A slab of half-rotted wood, so old it looked like it was part of the tree. Letters had been scorched deep into the grain, not carved. They seemed to shimmer in my flashlight beam, to writhe like black worms. No further. Trade already made. I stopped dead, my boots sinking into the soft mulch. My blood ran cold. What trade? Nelson's disappearance flashed in my mind. The word from the map tithe. I spun around, a desperate urge to flee finally overwhelming the pull of the path. I looked back the way I came. The path was gone. There was no gap in the undergrowth, no subtle dip in the land, just an unbroken, impenetrable wall of twisted, black-bark trees. Tighter now. They seemed to have pressed in around me, sealing me in. I fumbled for my radio again. Useless. I tried my GPS. The screen was blank, lifeless. I cupped my hand around my mouth and shouted, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice died the instant it left my lips. There was no echo. It was absorbed by the suffocating silence. But my shout had disturbed something. There was a sound, a movement, not behind me, to my left. The whisper of dry leaves skittering across stone, but there were no leaves on the path, only damp earth. It was a gliding, dragging sound. Something that didn't walk. Something that didn't need to touch the ground. Closer now. My flashlight flickered violently, the beam strobing like a dying pulse. I dropped it, my hand shaking uncontrollably as I reached for the comforting weight of the revolver at my hip. My hand touched the smooth leather of an empty holster. It was gone. The holster was still there, but the gun had vanished. I hadn't felt it fall. I hadn't heard it drop. It was just a gone. Another piece of my world, neatly excised. Sheer animal terror took over. I ran. I crashed blindly through the darkness, branches whipping my face like thorny lashes. Roots, like skeletal claws, reached up from the earth to snag my boots. My dying flashlight, lying on the forest floor behind me, finally gave out, plunging me into a smothering, absolute blackness. I ran on instinct, fueled by adrenaline, my lungs burning. And then I stopped. Because I saw it. Looming in the suffocating dark, a shape. It was barely visible, a distortion in the blackness, a silhouette made of deeper shadow. It was immense, 10 feet tall, towering. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but draped in what looked like rags of moss and bark. And where its head should have been, there was just a void, a perfect circular hole burned into the very fabric of the world. It was a patch of anti-existence, a vacuum that seemed to pull at the light and the air around it. And floating inside that impossible emptiness was my face. It wasn't a reflection. It was a three-dimensional, fully formed replica of my own head. And it was smiling. Not my smile. It was a wide, predatory, knowing grin. A smile of welcome. The world tilted, and the darkness rushed in to claim me. I must have passed out. Or maybe passing out is just the term my mind assigned to the chunk of time that was stolen from me. When I woke, I was lying on my back in the center of a perfectly circular clearing. There were no leaves, no branches, no weeds, just dirt. It was smooth and hard-packed, like polished bone, and cold against my cheek. Looking closer, I could see faint, geometric patterns etched into its surface, spiraling out from the center where I lay, almost too subtle to be seen. My pack was beside me. The relief was so sharp it almost brought me to tears. But when I unzipped it, the relief curdled into a profound sense of violation. The contents were all there. My spare batteries, my water bottle, my first aid kit, my rations. But they had been rearranged, unpacked, and then meticulously organized. My canteens were parallel to each other. My granola bars were stacked in a perfect pyramid. Each item was laid out in a grid, almost ceremonial, like an offering on an altar. And my notebook, the one I'd been logging coordinates and observations in since I arrived at Shroudwood, was blank. Every single page. There was no ink, no pencil marks, not even the faint imprint of my pen on the page beneath. It was as if it had never been written in. Even my own name, Reed Dawson, which I had written on the inside front flap, was gone. I felt a sudden, sickening tug deep inside my mind. A neurological lurch, like a file being deleted from a hard drive. Something was missing. I tried to recite the park's primary radio distress code, an alphanumeric string burned into the memory of every ranger. Echo Kilo 79er. I faltered. My mind went utterly blank. I knew there was a last digit. I could feel the shape of the memory, the empty space where it used to be, but the digit itself was gone, erased. Panic, cold and oily, began to creep into my veins. I tried my own ID number. Blank. I tried to remember the name of my supervisor who had assigned me this post. Gone. How long had I been a ranger? 5 years? 10? I couldn't remember. With a shaking hand, I reached for my wallet and flipped it open to my ID. The name was still there, Reed Dawson. But the picture, it was not me. It was close. Horrifyingly close. It had my hair color, my skin tone, the same basic facial structure. But the eyes weren't mine. They were colder, flatter. And they were smiling. The same wide, knowing smile I had seen in the void. I wasn't smiling. I touched my own face, tracing the line of my jaw, the bridge of my nose, desperately trying to find the discrepancy, to prove that the alien in my wallet was a forgery. But I couldn't be sure. I couldn't conjure a clear image of my own face to compare it to. I stumbled to my feet, my legs weak and unsteady. I tried to retrace my steps, to find a way out of this perfect, sterile clearing. but every direction looked the same. There was no sun to orient myself. No shadows. The blackbark trees didn't grow outward anymore. They bent inward, their branches forming arches over the clearing. I wasn't in a forest. I was inside a cathedral of bark and bone. And everywhere I walked, I heard them, the whispers. They weren't loud. They weren't clear. They were rustling voices moving just behind a curtain of silence, like the sound of sand pouring through a sieve. They slithered and coiled around the edges of my hearing. Most spoken languages I couldn't possibly understand, guttural clicks and sibilant, flowing phrases. But a few were familiar. They were fragments of my own life, weaponized against me. A woman's voice tight with frustration. You promised. You said it was only for 2 weeks. My sister, Sarah. I think I had a sister named Sarah. The memory was thin, like worn fabric. Then a man's voice, ragged and desperate, layered with static as if from a bad radio transmission. I left it for you in the locker. You have to burn the map, Reed. You have to burn it. Nelson, the ranger who vanished. His voice was a ghost in my head. I ran again. Not because I had a plan, but because standing still felt like an invitation. It felt like letting them take another piece. The forest was a labyrinth. I eventually stumbled, gasping for breath, upon a structure. It was small, wooden, and leaning at a dangerous angle, as if the forest were slowly shouldering it into the ground. A forgotten ranger outpost. Vines as thick as my arm coiled around it like pythons, and the roof had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole to the colorless sky. But the door, surprisingly, swung open with a low groan. Inside, darkness and the smell of rot and damp earth. And then the sound of breathing. Something was alive in here. A figure was huddled in the far corner, its back to me. It was wrapped in rags, its form skeletal, its breathing shallow and fast, like a frightened animal. Hello, I whispered, my voice cracking. It turned ever so slowly. The movement was stiff, unnatural. I took a reflexive step back, my stomach clenching into a knot of ice. It was me, or a version of me. Emaciated, hollow-eyed, his skin stretched tight over his skull. His face and hands were covered in a layer of soot and grime, and tiny bits of bark were embedded in his skin. His eyes were filmed over, vacant and dead. He opened his mouth, and a dry, rustling whisper, my own voice but stripped of all life, filled the small cabin. He trades your pieces for space in the loop. The longer you stay, the less you are. I shook my head, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. What are you talking about? What is this place? The emaciated me smiled. It was a full, unnatural stretch of his lips, a rictus of pure horror. He pointed a skeletal, grimy finger to his own temple. He eats remembrance, he whispered. I fled again, bursting out of the cabin door and back into the unreal twilight of the woods. But now things were different. The evidence of lost time was no longer just in my mind. It was on my body. My sturdy hiking boots were scuffed and worn down, the tread almost smooth, as if I'd been walking for weeks. My watch, which had been frozen, was now cracked across the face. My hands, which had been calloused but clean, were now covered in a lattice of fine white scars I didn't remember getting. And the worst part, I passed the same towering stone cairn 4 times, approaching it from 4 different directions. I was walking in circles, and each time I saw it, it was built higher. More stones, smooth, black stones added to the top, like it was counting my loops, counting down to something. After the 4th passing, desperate for a different path, I kicked at the base of a rotten log. My boot struck something hard, metal. I knelt down and clawed at the damp earth and mulch. I uncovered a rusted, military green footlocker, half buried in the soil. It looked like someone had tried to hide it to give it back to the earth. The latch was rusted shut, but I managed to pry it open with the blade of my knife. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like human hair, was an old, portable cassette player. and a single cassette tape. On the plastic label, in Nelson's frantic scrawl, were 2 words: Trade Log Nelson. My hands trembled as I inserted the tape and pressed the stiff plastic play button. The gears whirred. Static hissed. And then Nelson's voice. I don't know. 3, 4. The trail doesn't let you keep time. I made a trade. I didn't know I was making it. I just wanted a way out. I passed a cairn, and when I looked back, the path was gone. It took the color blue. I can see the sky, but I can't name the color. It's just gone. His voice was strained, terrified. There was a click, then more recording. Another loop. I can feel myself getting thinner. The entity, it doesn't speak. It just shows you what it wants. A memory. A concept. I gave it my memory of my mother's face to get my radio to work. It crackled for 5 seconds. Not worth it. Oh God, not worth it. The final entry was barely a whisper, ragged and broken. I gave him everything except my name. That's all I have left. It's the anchor. If you hear this, if anyone hears this, don't speak your name out loud. Don't even think it too loud. It's the last thing you have. The tape clicked, followed by a long, drawn-out hiss, and then a sound from the machine itself. A sound so sharp and close it made my heart stop. Thump. A single hard knock, as if someone had rapped their knuckle sharply on the plastic casing of the player I was holding in my own hands. I froze, my fingers locked around the cassette player. The knock came again. Thump. Louder. Slower. A deliberate, patient sound. The tape clicked, and the spools stopped turning. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. The rusted-out outpost creaked around me, the sound of a dying thing. The knock hadn't come from the door. It wasn't from the walls. It was inside with me, inches away. A cold spot formed on the back of my neck. The air grew thick and heavy, and the faint coppery smell from the trail returned, stronger now. It was the scent of something breathing inches from my ear. A dry, rattling exhalation. I spun around, flashlight held high like a weapon. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The outpost was empty, but I could still feel it. A weight in the air. Pressure. The feeling of being watched by something that didn't need eyes. Then the whispers returned. Not in the air around me. This time, they were inside my skull, a chorus of insidious voices dragging their serrated edges across my consciousness. They weren't just words anymore. They were fragments of me, my identity, my history, being pulled apart like threads from a tapestry. Dawson, Ranger, Sister, Sarah, the taste of coffee. Don't forget your first. Gone. The memories would begin to form and then shatter, dissolving into static, like trying to hold water in a sieve. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, a raw cry of frustration tearing from my throat. My own voice, my sense of self, was slipping away. I remembered Nelson's final, desperate warning on the tape. He eats remembrance. And the chilling addendum for my hollow-eyed double, don't speak your name out loud. I hadn't, but it was still taking me piece by piece. The entity didn't need me to offer the trade anymore. It was just taking. I needed answers. A weapon. A strategy. My mind, frantic and fragmenting, latched onto a single thought, the Black Book. Every remote outpost has one. A heavy, leather-bound, waterproof ledger. It's a last-ditch field log, a place for rangers to document strange sightings, outline search efforts for the lost, or leave end-of-watch notes when they know they aren't coming back. I scrambled over to the rotten desk and tore at the drawers. The first 2 were empty. The third was scorched black, as if it had survived a fire. I wrenched it open, splinters digging into my fingers. Inside, warped by heat and moisture, was Shroudwood's Black Book. I flipped through the burnt, brittle pages. Most were unreadable, the ink smeared into brown clouds. But one page, near the end, was still legible. Nelson's handwriting, scrawled and sharp, the pen having dug deep into the paper. It was the writing of a man in a panic. Entry, October 12th. The trail appeared again. It's not on the maps, but the old one I found in the cabin keeps showing up, no matter where I put it. It's like it wants to be found. It needs to be found. First sign of it, the whispers, then the cairns, then the trade. You don't realize you've made a trade until the piece of you is gone. It's not random. It takes what makes you you. Your skills, your memories, your senses. Tom, I think it started as a deal, some ancient bargain with whatever lives in this part of the woods. Leave an offering of meat or grain and walk through safely. But it's grown hungry, or it's forgotten the old rules. Now there's no leaving. Not unless someone finishes the circle. Circle? The tithe path was a loop. The clearing was a circle. Was that what this was? A countdown? A full revolution? I suddenly remembered the cairns. Each one I'd passed on my repeated, memory-wiped loops looked newer, the stones more carefully stacked. What if each time I blacked out and woke up in that clearing, I was starting the loop again, unknowingly placing another stone on the pile, paying another tithe? What if I was the one building them? I flipped the page. More writing. Sloppier now, the letters barely formed. Nelson's mind unraveling on the page. My name is Nelson Barr. Badge 481. My name is Nelson. I was born in. My name is Nelson. I don't remember. I traded my voice so it couldn't make me speak my name. Then I traded the memory of my own face so I wouldn't see it in the void. I still have my name. It's all I have. If you're reading this, don't give it your name. The path takes what you give it freely. But if you finish the loop, if you get to the end, the last stone, you can take something back. Take something back. The words hung in there. It wasn't an escape. It was a transaction. I finally understood. The path was a trap, a parasitic loop that fed the entity with every step, every circuit. Each pass through this dead forest gave it more of me, more memories, more of my identity, which it used to build itself. But it could only take what I didn't consciously protect, what I didn't name. So I did something desperate, a gamble born of sheer terror. I opened my blank notebook. I found a pen in my pack. I began to write to anchor myself. I wrote down every concrete fact I could still cling to, naming them on the page to shield them in my mind. My sister's name is Sarah. She laughs with a snort. My first dog's name was Tucker. He was a golden retriever. The emergency ranger code is Echo Kilo 7902. The last digit, 2, came back to me in a flash as my pen touched the paper, a small victory that felt monumental. My badge number is 71302. And finally, at the bottom of the page, in big block letters, I wrote, my name is Reed Dawson. I didn't say it. I didn't even let my mind linger on the sound of it. I tore the page out, folded it into a tight square, and taped it shut with medical tape from my kit. I pried open the cassette player and slipped the folded paper inside, on top of Nelson's tape. A tiny vault for the last pieces of me. Then, clutching the player, I stood up and walked out of the outpost. I didn't look for a way out. I walked back toward the cairns, back into the heart of the loop. The forest warped around me. Trees leaned in, their black branches clawing at the air. Voices screamed in my ears, but they sounded like they were playing in reverse. This time, I walked with purpose. I passed the cairns, but in reverse order. As I passed the 5th cairn, it shuddered, and a single stone from the top cracked and tumbled to the ground in slow motion. At that moment, I lost the memory of my childhood home. I knew I had one, but the image, the layout, the address, all gone. At the 3rd cairn, another stone fell. I forgot how old I was. The number vanished. At the 2nd, I forgot what year it was. The entire concept of the current date dissolved into fog. And then I reached the first cairn I had seen. The entrance to the sequence. A single smooth black stone balanced perfectly on a thin, dry twig. As my hand reached for it, I heard the voice. Not a whisper. Not in my head. It was a deep, resonant sound that was both a voice and a feeling, coming from the entity that I could now feel standing directly behind me. Trade. Or be traded. I turned, and I saw it fully. A shroud of ash and echoes and stolen light, rising 15 feet tall. Its face was a swirling, warped mirror, but it no longer reflected me. It reflected all the versions of me it had consumed. Dozens of reeds stared back, a terrified one from the first chase, a confused one from the clearing, an emaciated, hollow one from the outpost. Some were screaming silently. Some were smiling that awful, knowing smile. All of them were trapped in that void, and all of them were now part of the entity. It didn't move. It didn't speak again. But I felt the offer settle into my mind, cold and clear. Trade one final, essential piece. A core memory. A defining trait. Complete the loop. And you can leave with one thing. I looked at the single stone on the twig. I looked back at the swirling void of my own faces. I thought about Nelson's note, you can take something back. I didn't offer a memory. I didn't offer a skill. I took the single black stone from the twig. It was colder than ice, and I ate it. I forced it into my mouth, the gritty texture coating my tongue. I choked it down my throat like a shard of glass. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that seared through my entire being. And then, sunlight. Blinding, warm, real sunlight on my face. The sound of birdsong. The smell of pine needles and damp, living earth. I was lying on the ground near Post 12B. 3 other rangers in familiar green and gray uniforms stood over me, their faces a mixture of shock and profound relief. He's breathing. Get the medevac on the horn now, one of them shouted. They've been searching for me for over 2 weeks. My pack was missing. My notebook, my flashlight, my revolver, all gone, but clutched tight in my right hand, so tight my knuckles were white, was the old cassette player. It was still intact. The tape was still inside, and on the label, which now looked faded and ancient, were Nelson's words. And below them, in my own handwriting, shakily written on a piece of medical tape I didn't remember placing there, were 2 words. Reed Dawson. It wasn't my name. It was the thing I had taken back. I was out. That should have been the end of the story. A harrowing tale of survival to be filed away. Another legend to add to the lore of Shroudwood. But nothing felt right. The sky was too bright, the blue of it sharp and painful to my eyes. The trees were too still, their leaves unmoving in the windless air. The world felt shallow, like a flawless, high-resolution photograph of something that had been real once, but was now just an imitation. I was medevaced out of the preserve that same day, the rhythmic whump-whump-whump of the helicopter blades doing little to drown out the oppressive silence that still echoed in my mind. At the regional hospital, they said I was a textbook case, severe dehydration, hypothermic, and suffering from prolonged delirium. But my vitals were fine. Too fine. My blood pressure was perfect. My heart rate was that of a resting athlete. The nurse who gently cleaned the dried blood and grime from under my fingernails looked at me with a confused frown. That's funny, she said, dabbing a cotton swab on my hand. This blood, it's not your type. In fact, it's not matching any common human blood type. It's old, too. Almost black. She shrugged and tossed the swab into a biohazard bag. They didn't ask too many questions. They chalked it all up to trauma. No one mentioned a hand-drawn map. No one asked about a path that wasn't there. No one mentioned the tithe path. When I finally felt lucid enough, I asked the park supervisor, a grim-faced man named Henderson, about Nelson Bar. Did you ever find him? I asked, my voice hoarse. Henderson just blinked at me, his expression flat. Nelson who? My skin went cold. Nelson Barr. The ranger I was filling in for. The man who went missing. Son, you were filling in because the post was vacant, Henderson said slowly, as if talking to a child. Our last ranger in that sector retired 2 years ago. We've been trying to fill the slot ever since. No, I insisted, my voice rising with panic. Check the personnel file. Check the duty roster for last month. To humor me, he did. He called the main office. I watched as his face went from patient to puzzled. He hung up the phone. There's no record of any Nelson Barr ever working in the park system. Not locally. Not nationally. The name doesn't exist in our database. His photo, his ID, his badge number, his entire history wiped. As if he had never existed. Except the name was still on the cassette tape in the evidence bag with my personal effects. I hadn't let go of it. Not once. Back in my own apartment, 100 miles from the oppressive quiet of Shroudwood, things got worse. The world was the same, but I was the variable that had changed. I'd be in the shower and suddenly forget how long I'd lived there. Was it 3 years or 5? I'd look at photos on my wall of me and my sister, Sarah, and feel a profound disconnect, as if I were looking at the life of a stranger. I started waking up with dirt under my fingernails, the same dark, rich soil from the clearing. Pine needles would appear in my sheets, and in the dead of night, in the deepest hour of silence, I'd hear it, thump. A single soft knock that sounded like it came from inside my own bedroom wall. I'd sit bolt upright, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. But it was never followed by anything. No one was ever there. No one I could see anyway. I started seeing my own face in strange places. A fleeting reflection in the dark screen of the microwave that didn't move when I did. My shadow on the pavement stretching in the wrong direction from the sun. Once, for a terrifying half-second, I caught a glimpse of someone standing behind me in my bathroom mirror. He was wearing my ranger uniform, and he was smiling. I finally worked up the courage to retrieve the cassette player from my belongings. I didn't play Nelson's tape. I couldn't bear to hear his descent again. Instead, I ejected it and found another tape underneath it, one I hadn't seen before. It must have been in the player when I found it. It was unlabeled, except for a single, barely visible thumbprint in what looked like dried blood. I put it in and pressed play. The audio was warped, distorted, but the voice was clear enough. It was my voice, pleading, crying, repeating a single phrase over and over. I traded my name. I traded my name. I traded my name. I traded. Then a burst of static. Then a low guttural laugh that was not mine. And finally a second voice, the entity's voice, the voice that was both sound and feeling, whispering from the tiny speaker. Now you are part of the loop. I ripped the tape out, and in a fit of panicked rage, I destroyed it. I burned Nelson's tape. I burned the map, which had reappeared, neatly folded, in the pocket of the jeans they'd given me at the hospital. I burned everything that had come back from Shroudwood. I thought that would end it. The next morning, I walked into my kitchen to make coffee. They were all back, laid out neatly on my kitchen table. The 2 tapes, fused and melted, but somehow whole again. The scorched, brittle map, and next to them a small cairn. 7 smooth, black river stones, stacked in an impossible, gravity-defying tower. The sight of it made me sick to my stomach. I knew the number 7. I had seen it in Nelson's black book. The final stone. My phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped my mug. I didn't recognize the number. As I reached for it, my voicemail alert beeped. A new message had arrived a split second before the call started. That was impossible. A cold dread washed over me. I let the call go to voicemail, and then, with a trembling finger, I played the message. It was my own voice, screaming, a raw, panicked, desperate sound. Don't pick up. Reed, it's not them. It's not you. Don't. The scream was cut off by a burst of static, and then, faint but unmistakable, coming from the phone's tiny speaker.